I mean, it definitely feels like it's on the edge. The return early in the new year, I think, was boy, talk about taking off with speed. The capture of Madura and quickly pivoting to making claims on Greenland, and then Iran of its own accord, people on the streets, and Trump contemplating what his options are. It really is extraordinary, and that's even setting aside the domestic story. I think that you know, international relations hasn't always been easy. It's been very difficult the last 1 year. There's so many questions about the United States, but I think nobody could have predicted that this was going to become so much about preeminence in the Western Hemisphere, about pushing territorial borders, whether it's through threats or actual use of force, taking leaders out. We thought this would be a president who might be neo-isolationist, who might be, inclined towards restraint. That is just not what we're seeing right now, with the major exception of, China, U.S. policy towards China and Russia, exactly where we thought, it might be much tougher, at least when it comes to China. And that, again, that's not what we've seen.
And Leslie, to throw into the mix now, we're ratcheting things up against Iran, right? With the president now saying he wants to impose 25% tariffs on any country doing business with Iran. What are the implications there as that country now sees its biggest anti-government protests in years and killing of many civilians?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Iran story is an extraordinary one, devastating for the presumably thousands of people who are at risk or have been targeted by the regime. And I think President Trump is weighing his options. You're right; those 25%. He's cracking down on secondary violation of sanctions, basically, and that hits, of course, China and others that he's been lighter touch with. But relative to the other options that the U.S. could be considering, that is, perhaps a first step. The real question is whether there will be any use of military force. Obviously, a much harder, more risky lift. I'm skeptical at the moment, but Trump today is meeting to consider his options. It
Right.
could be that we just continue to see cracking down on, these sanctions, as you've mentioned, as sort of and wait and see what happens internally.
Good morning, Chicago. Good morning across America. Leslie Vinjamuri with us here. We continue with her. Leslie, your hallmark is to always bring in academics. You bring in from Minnesota Professor Fazal, Tanisha Fazal, and just say she has written the absolute best on autocratic states. How autocratic is the United States of America?
Look, the United States of America is not autocratic. We have a leader with autocratic tendency who likes to, play fast and loose with the rule of law, who doesn't really feel like he should be constrained by Congress, the courts, norms, standard ways of doing things, convention. And this is the year of the people, Tom. This is the year when Americans are, making choices about whether they're going to kind of stand up and hold the line. And we've just seen a bunch of past leaders of the Fed decide that they are going to stand up. And we saw a couple of senators, Republican senators, flip over to the other side and vote for, the president to be required to report to Congress if he wishes to do more in Venezuela. So we're seeing a few hints this year, early days, that we didn't see last year. And we have, it's a long ways out still, but we have the midterms coming. So there are some signs that there's going to be a little bit more pushback. We don't live in an autocracy. We live in a, very dysfunctional democracy, but still a very robust democracy, with a leader who, by all accounts, wants to make some changes. Some of his instincts are very good, but he doesn't want to do it through the processes that, we've come to think are, not necessarily efficient, but that are important.
Right. And Trump certainly is unbound and undeterred by precedent. So what happens with little old Greenland in 2026, Leslie?
I'm kind of concerned on this one. A couple of things. Obviously, Europeans are rightfully up in arms. They are really talking to each other. They're completely unsettled by the president's willingness to threaten the use of force, to argue that he can get it just, with money and language. It sort of doesn't matter whether he actually uses force in one sense, which is he's already completely unsettled the most important norm that has guided the system at least since 1945. Article 2, Chapter 4 of the UN Charter, you don't use force to unsettle territorial boundaries. It's the sovereignty norm. But here's the rub. If you look at the data, most Greenlanders would prefer to be independent than to be ruled by Denmark. And this is, I think, where the administration is going to play its hand. It's going to push that division internally. It's going to, we've already seen there have been trips by the administration meeting with those leaders of the independence movement. I think that's going to continue. And you can see a scenario where Greenland is given the opportunity to voice its preferences, and it wishes to have an independence. And as we know, Greenland can't really survive as an independent country. It's 57,000 people. It is in a part of the world where it needs more security. So I think this one is definitely a live option and something to watch. And it's going to really rupture relations between the U.S. and Europe.